The church doors opened without announcement. No music, no whisper, just the low, deliberate sound of wood shifting on old hinges. I didn't turn at first. I'd spent most of the morning looking straight ahead, hands folded over the head of my cane, studying the white lilies arranged near the altar as if they required tactical analysis. The pew beneath me was hard, not the front row. Third from the back, appropriate, I'd been told. But when the room went quiet, truly quiet, the kind of silence that settles into a man's ribs, I knew something had changed. I turned. They entered in pairs, dark suits, clean lines, shoulders squared the way time never quite manages to soften. Some walked with a stiffness that comes from old injuries and colder places. A few carried canes of their own, silver hair. Steady eyes, medals were not displayed loudly, but they were there. Small ribbons, discreet pins, enough for those who understood to understand. My former unit, 23 of them. They didn't look at the guests. They didn't look at the groom's family seated in polished rows near the front. They looked at me, and then, as one, they stopped. You could feel it ripple through the room. Confusion first, then recognition. From the right side of the aisle, where the groom's father sat, his posture shifted. His smile disappeared. At the altar, my daughter turned. I watched the exact moment her expression changed. Her bouquet dipped slightly. Her shoulders stiffened. The color drained from her face in a way no makeup could disguise. She looked from them. To me, I didn't move, didn't wave, didn't nod. I simply held her gaze. An hour earlier, I had overheard her laugh softly and say, "Oh, him? He's just a retired nobody. He keeps things small." The word nobody hadn't stung the way people might imagine. It settled instead, heavy, final. Now, as 23 men who had once trusted me with their lives stood at the back of the church, the definition of that word seemed unstable. The officiant cleared his throat. Uncertain. And I realized this wedding was no longer entirely under my daughter's control. It hadn't been for some time. 3 months earlier, she'd asked me not to make things complicated. That was the first sign. 3 months earlier, my life was quiet in a way I had earned. I wake most mornings at 5:12 a.m. No alarm. Haven't needed one in 40 years. The house is small. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, white siding that needs repainting if I'm honest. It sits at the edge of town where the pavement turns to gravel, and the sky feels wider than it does near the shopping centers. I make coffee the same way I always have. No puts, no machines that hum and blink. Just grounds, water, patience. After that, I walk. There's a trail behind Miller's feed store that runs along the river. It isn't scenic in the dramatic sense. Mud in the spring, dry weeds in the summer. But it's steady ground. I prefer steady ground. Most people in town know me as Mr. Carter. Some remember I was in the army. Fewer ask questions. I've never offered details. When you spend enough years explaining things to families in quiet living rooms, you learn not to romanticize service. My wife, Ellen, used to say I wore silence like a uniform. She's been gone 8 years now. Pancreatic cancer. Efficient, unapologetic. After she passed, the house became quieter but not empty. There's a difference. Her chair is still near the window. I dust it. I don't sit in it. My daughter, Rachel, lives 40 minutes away in a newer development with stone mailboxes and an HOA that sends letters if your grass grows half an inch too high. She's 32, smart, organized, always moving towards something. She works in corporate communications, public relations, technically. Image management, she once called it over dinner, controlling the narrative before someone else does. I remember smiling at that. Rachel and I have never been loud people. Even when she was a teenager, our disagreements were measured. She'd argue her point. I'd listen. Sometimes I'd concede. Sometimes she would. After Ellen died, it was just the two of us for a while. Sunday dinners. Hardware store runs. I helped her replace a garbage disposal once. She pretended not to be impressed. Then she met Daniel. Daniel Whitaker came from a family that didn't do anything quietly. His father owns 3 regional car dealerships and sits on the board of a local hospital. His mother organizes charity galas with themes that require mood boards. Daniel himself is polite. Firm handshake. Direct eye contact. The kind of young man who says "sir" without irony. The first time I met him, he looked around my house. Not critically, just, Curiously, "You keep it simple," he said. "I try to," I replied. Rachel squeezed his arm lightly, like she was guiding him through unfamiliar terrain. They got engaged last fall. Small dinner. Expensive restaurant. I wore my only navy blazer. Rachel cried when I hugged her. Real tears. The kind that land warm against your collar. "I want you right there when I walk down the aisle," she whispered. "I'll be there," I said. And I meant it. In the months that followed, wedding planning became its own campaign. Venues, guest lists, seating charts. I was asked for addresses of distant relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. I provided them. There were meetings I wasn't invited to, tastings I didn't attend. I assumed that was normal. Rachel began speaking in bullet points. "Daniel's parents are inviting some important people. We're keeping the ceremony elegant and streamlined. Needs to reflect both families. I noticed around that time she stopped asking about my walks, about the river, about whether I was sleeping well. When I visited her new townhouse one Sunday, I saw framed engagement photos lining the hallway. Vineyard backdrop, golden light, coordinated outfits. There wasn't a single photo of her mother. I didn't mention it. During lunch, Daniel's mother called. Rachel put her on speaker without meaning to. "We just want everything to look cohesive," the woman said. "No surprises," Rachel laughed lightly. "Don't worry. My dad keeps things small." I was in the room when she said it. It didn't sound cruel. It sounded rehearsed. Later, as I washed my plate at her sink, Rachel touched my elbow. "Dad," she began carefully, "I might need to talk to you about something." Her tone wasn't confrontational. It was professional. The way she must speak to clients who require gentle correction. I dried my hands on a dish towel and nodded. Of course. That was the first time I sensed the shift, not in her affection, but in her priorities. It's a subtle thing. Realizing you've become an accessory in your child's life rather than a foundation. Not unwanted. Just inconvenient in certain lighting. 2 weeks later, she came to my house alone. She brought lemon bars from a bakery I couldn't pronounce, and she said, "You or Dad, I need you to understand something about Daniel's family." That's when the conversation began. Rachel sat at my kitchen table like she used to when she was studying for finals. Back straight. Hands folded, expression prepared. The lemon bars remained untouched between us. "Daniel's family is very visible," she began. I poured her coffee. "Visible how?" "They're connected. Business, politics, donors, that sort of thing." She offered a small shrug. "They're used to a certain image." I sat across from her. "And what image is that?" She hesitated, choosing language the way she always had. Carefully, strategically. Polished, predictable, controlled. I nodded once. "Go on," she inhaled slowly. "Dad, you know how sometimes people get curious when they hear someone had a long military career. I suppose. They ask questions," she continued. "They Google. They exaggerate. Sometimes they make it into something dramatic." I watched her face as she spoke. She wasn't embarrassed yet. Not openly. She was managing risk. "And we don't want drama," she added. "No," I agreed. "Weddings are complicated enough." She relaxed slightly at that. Agreement had always steadied her. "It's just..." She leaned forward. "Daniel's father is very particular about messaging. He's worked hard to build a reputation. He doesn't like unknown variables." "Am I an unknown variable?" I asked gently. Her eyes flickered. "No, of course not." A quick correction. "It's just that..." "So you don't really talk about what you did." "Which is fine. I respect that. But when people don't have information, they fill in the gaps. I let that settle between us. I kept things quiet for a reason," I said. "Not because there's something to hide." "I know that," she replied quickly. "I do. But not everyone understands nuance." Nuance, that word again, like narrative, like image. She reached across the table and placed her hand over mine. Her grip was warm, familiar. "I just think it might be better if at the wedding we keep your background." "Simple. Simple how?" She hesitated. "Just say you're retired. That you served. Nothing specific." "I am retired," I said calmly. "Yes, but..." She stopped herself. "Dad, you know what I mean. I did. She didn't want stories. She didn't want old colleagues introducing themselves. She didn't want unexpected acknowledgements that might redirect attention. She wanted symmetry. "Is this about Daniel?" I asked. Her jaw tightened slightly. "It's about harmony." That wasn't my question. She exhaled. "Daniel admires you." "He does, but his father—" "He respects influence, titles, boards, visibility. And I don't qualify. That's not fair. It's accurate." Silence stretched across the kitchen. The refrigerator hummed behind her. Rachel withdrew her hand and folded both of hers in her lap. "I just don't want anyone looking down on you," she said quietly. There it was, not embarrassment, protection in her mind. "I've been looked down on before," I replied. "It's survivable." She gave a small, frustrated smile. "You always do that." "Do what?" "Turn everything into a lesson." I considered that. "Occupational habit." She didn't laugh. "Dad," she said more firmly, "this day isn't about the past. It's about the future Daniel and I are building. I need everything aligned. No surprises. No moments where someone says something that shifts the room. Shifts it how?" She looked at me carefully. Daniel's father mentioned that sometimes military stories can be polarizing. I almost smiled at that. "War tends to be," I said. She winced slightly. "See, that's what I mean." I leaned back in my chair. The wood creaked under my weight. "Rachel, are you asking me not to speak at your wedding?" Her eyes widened. "No, I don't know. We haven't finalized that part, but you've considered removing it." She didn't answer. That was answer enough. "I would never intentionally embarrass you," I said evenly. "I know that." "Then trust that I can navigate a room." "It's not about navigation," she insisted. "It's about perception." She stood and walked to the window over the sink, staring out at the yard where the grass needed cutting. "Daniel's family has a certain expectation of stature," she said softly. "They're used to introductions that carry weight. And mine don't." She turned back toward me. "Dad, please don't make this harder than it has to be." "Harder," I studied her face. She wasn't cruel. She wasn't calculating in a malicious way. She was afraid of misalignment. "When your mother and I married," I said carefully, "we had the reception in a church basement. Folding chairs. Store-bought cake. My commanding officer came in uniform because he drove straight from base. No one asked him to tone it down." Rachel's expression softened at the mention of her mother. "This isn't the same," she said. "No," I agreed. "It isn't." She walked back to the table and picked up her purse. "So, you'll keep it simple?" she asked. There was something in her eyes then. Not superiority, not even shame. Anxiety. She needed certainty. "I will not complicate your day," I said. Relief washed over her features. "Thank you." She kissed my cheek before leaving. The lemon bars stayed behind. After she drove away, I remained at the table for a long time, not angry, just aware. For the first time, I understood that my daughter wasn't ashamed of who I was. She was afraid of what it might reveal about her. A week later, she called again. This time, the request was more specific. Rachel called on a Tuesday evening while I was replacing the batteries in the hallway smoke detector. "Dad, do you have a minute?" "I always have a minute for you." There was a pause on the line. Paper shuffling in the background. "I've been reviewing the seating layout with Daniel's parents," she said. "We're trying to be thoughtful about dynamics." "Dynamics," I repeated mildly. "Climbing down the step stool." "Yes, visibility, mostly." I waited. "We were thinking," she continued carefully, "that maybe you'd be more comfortable sitting a few rows back, not directly in front of Daniel's extended family." "Why would I be uncomfortable in the front row at my daughter's wedding?" "It's not about comfort," she said quickly. "It's about optics." There it was again, optics. I walked into the living room and sat in my usual chair. "What are the optics of a father sitting in the front row?" I asked. She lowered her voice slightly. "Daniel's father is inviting a state senator and a retired federal judge, people who notice things, such as inconsistencies," she replied. "Inconsistencies between what and what?" "Between silence and substance," I thought. "Between the man they assumed I was and the one I had chosen to be." "Dad, she said, a hint of strain creeping in. It's just easier if the visual story is clean. Visual story, I repeated. She exhaled slowly. You're doing that thing again. What thing? Turning words back on me. I'm only trying to understand. Another pause. There's something else, she added. I waited. Daniel's father suggested that, given your quiet lifestyle, it might be nice if one of his business partners escorted me down the aisle. The room didn't change temperature, but something inside me did. Escorted you, I said evenly. Yes, just ceremonially, symbolically representing the joining of families. And what would I be representing? You'd still be there, she insisted. Of course you would, just not front and center. I pictured the aisle, the pews, my daughter's arm resting on someone else's sleeve. Does Daniel support this? I asked. He wants everyone comfortable. That's not what I asked, she hesitated. He thinks it avoids awkward questions. What questions? About you. I let the silence stretch long enough for her to feel it. Finally, I said, Rachel, are you ashamed of me? The sharp intake of breath told me I'd touched the center of it. No, she said, almost offended. How could you even… Then why am I being repositioned? It's strategic, she said, and immediately seemed to regret the word. I almost smiled. I see. She shifted tactics. There's also a practical matter, she continued. Daniel's father asked whether you have your affairs in order. State planning, medical directives. He's seen situations where things become messy. I have a will, I said calmly. It was updated last year, that's good. That's great, she sounded relieved. He just thinks clarity prevents complications. Complications for whom? For everyone. There was something about the layering of it, the seating, the escort, the legal affairs that formed a pattern, subtle repositioning, not removing me outright, just reducing my footprint. I've managed complex situations before, I said quietly. I'm not prone to mess. I know that, she said softer now. But they don't know you. Have they tried? Another silence. They're busy people, Dad. So am I. The words surprised even me. Not because they were untrue, but because I rarely felt the need to say them. Rachel's voice lost some of its polish. Why are you pushing back on this? You said you wouldn't complicate things. I'm not complicating, I replied. I'm clarifying. She let out a breath that sounded almost like a laugh. Daniel's father just wants to avoid surprises, she said again, as if repetition would make it reasonable. I've never been fond of surprises myself, I said. We ended the call without resolution. 2 days later, I received an email from a law firm downtown, an invitation to review and confirm documentation for ceremonial purposes. Attached was a draft program for the wedding under processional. My name did not appear. Instead, it read Rachel Whitaker escorted by Mr. Thomas. Avery Whitaker. The surname shift was expected. The escort was not. I closed the document and sat. Back in my chair, I wasn't angry. Anger is loud. This was quieter than that. Later that week, I drove to the venue to familiarize myself with the layout. An old stone church renovated for events. High ceilings. Polished wood floors. I entered through a side door and heard voices from the reception hall. Rachel's voice. And my dad? Someone asked. She laughed softly. Oh, he's just a retired nobody. He keeps things small. The word landed differently when she thought I wasn't listening, not protective, not strategic, dismissive. I stood there a moment longer than I should have. Then I turned and walked back to my car. The wedding was 3 weeks away, and for the first time, I began to consider whether keeping things small had been a mistake. 3 weeks is a long time when you are waiting to be diminished politely. I considered calling Rachel several times. In fact, I imagined asking her directly whether she still wanted me to walk her down the aisle, whether she understood what that meant, whether she remembered being 8 years old and placing her feet on top of mine in the kitchen while Ellen laughed and told us we were dancing like two tired bears. But each time I picked up the phone, I set it back down. Not because I lacked courage, because I knew my daughter. If confronted, she would reorganize the conversation until the wound sounded like a misunderstanding. She would say I'd taken it wrong. She would say I was being sensitive. She would say Daniel's family had complicated expectations, and she was just trying to get through the day. Maybe all of that would be partly true. The trouble with partial truths is that they can still cut clean through a man. So I said nothing. I pressed my suit, polished my shoes. The morning of the wedding. I woke at 5:12 as always. For a few seconds before memory settled in, it was just another quiet morning. The room was blue with early light. The house smelled faintly of cedar and old paper. Then I remembered, my daughter was getting married. On the dresser, next to my watch, sat a small velvet box. Inside was Ellen's wedding ring. Rachel had asked for it years ago. Long before Daniel. Long before seating charts and optics and men with board seats. She was 16 then, standing in the doorway of my bedroom after her mother's funeral, eyes swollen and fierce. Someday, she'd said, if I get married, can I have Mom with me? I had promised her yes. So I took the ring from the box and held it in my palm. It looked smaller than memory allowed. Ellen had worn it through everything. Military housing, long deployments, birthdays missed and holidays rearranged, bad news delivered by telephone, good news whispered in kitchens after midnight. She wore it when Rachel was born. She wore it when she got sick. She wore it until her hands became too thin and I moved it to a chain around her neck. I closed my fingers around it carefully. I'll take care of her, I said to the empty room. Then, after a moment, I added, as best I can. I arrived at the church 2 hours early. Old habits. The parking lot was already half full. Florists moved quickly through the side entrance, carrying white arrangements taller than children. A photographer crossed the lawn with 2 cameras swinging from his shoulders. Young men in fitted suits laughed near the steps. Checking their phones, no one recognized me. That was fine. I have never required recognition to enter a room. Inside, the church had been transformed into something almost theatrical. White fabric draped along the pews, gold accents, candles and glass cylinders, a string quartet warming up near the front with soft, careful notes. Near the entrance stood a printed seating chart on an easel. I found my name after a moment. Mr. Samuel Carter, row 14. Seat 3, row 14 was not third from the back. It was the back. For a moment I thought there had been a mistake. Then I saw the front row marked for Daniel's parents, grandparents, siblings, and 2 names I did not know. The second row held business partners. The third, donors. Rachel's side began somewhere after the center aisle lost ceremonial importance. I stood there with my hand resting lightly on my cane. A young coordinator in a headset approached. Can I help you, sir? I'm Samuel Carter. She glanced at her clipboard. Her smile became efficient. Yes, Mr. Carter, your back left, aisle side. We've reserved easy access for you. Easy access, I said. For comfort, she replied. She meant no harm. That made it worse in a way. Thank you, I said. I walked to row 14 and sat down. From that distance, the altar looked smaller. My daughter's place at the front seemed almost like a scene viewed through glass. I placed Ellen's ring in my breast pocket. Guests began to arrive in waves. Perfume, cologne, low laughter. Men with expensive watches. Women with practiced smiles. People who were very comfortable being seen. Daniel's father entered like a man accustomed to rooms adjusting around him. Thomas Whitaker was broad, silver-haired, tanned in a way that suggested both golf and dermatology. He greeted guests by name and placed hands on shoulders with public warmth. When his eyes passed over me, they did not stop. A few minutes later, Daniel came in with 2 groomsmen. He looked nervous, as grooms should. I had no quarrel with that. Marriage should humble a man at least briefly. He saw me then and walked over. Mr. Carter, he said, extending his hand. Glad you made it. Made it, as though I had been uncertain to attend my only child's wedding. I wouldn't miss it, I replied. His grip was firm but distracted. Rachel's getting ready downstairs. She's emotional. That's allowed. He nodded, smiled, then leaned slightly closer. I just want to say I appreciate you being flexible about everything. Dad can be intense about these events, but it's all coming from a good place. Is it? The question seemed to catch him off balance. Well, he said, glancing toward the front. You know, big families, big expectations. I know something about expectations. He gave a short laugh, unsure whether I had made a joke. Right, of course. Then he patted my shoulder. It was brief, friendly enough. But there are gestures that place a man beneath you without anyone needing to say so. He returned to the front. I remained seated. About 15 minutes before the ceremony, I rose to find a restroom. The hallway beside the sanctuary was narrow, lined with framed photographs from past weddings, brides frozen mid-laugh, fathers holding daughters, hands resting on arms. At the end of the hall, near a half-open door, I heard Rachel's voice. "Please don't start," she said. "I'm not starting," Daniel replied. "I'm just saying my dad noticed your father sitting in the back." "Good call." My feet stopped before I told them to. Rachel's voice lowered. "I didn't want a whole thing." "A whole thing." "You know what I mean." There was a rustle of fabric. Maybe her dress. Maybe the veil. Daniel said, "He seems fine." "He's always fine," Rachel replied, and there was a tired affection in it for half a second. Then she added, "That's the problem. You never know what's underneath." Daniel chuckled softly. "Well, as long as he doesn't decide to give some war speech." "He won't." A pause. "I told your mom he was just a retired nobody from a small town." "That's easier for everyone." There it was again. Not overheard in passing this time. Not softened by distance or interpretation. Clear, deliberate, useful. I looked down at my shoes. Polished black, a scuff near the left toe I had missed. For a moment I felt older than 72. Not because of my knees, though they ached. Not because of the cane, though I needed it more than I admitted. Because a child can make a man ancient with one careless sentence. I stepped back before they saw me. In the sanctuary, the music had begun to change. Guests were taking their seats. Somewhere behind a closed door, my daughter was preparing to walk toward a future she believed required trimming me down to fit inside it. Returned to row 14, I placed both hands on the cane and looked toward the altar. That was when a man in a dark suit entered quietly through the rear doors and stopped beside my pew. He did not ask if I was Mr. Carter. He stood at attention and, in a voice low enough that only I could hear, he said, "Colonel." I did not look up immediately. Old instincts. Assess the voice before the face. Respectful. Steady. Controlled. "Colonel." I turned then. Major Daniel Ruiz stood beside the pew, older than the last time I had seen him. Hair more silver than black now, but posture unchanged. His suit was dark charcoal, cut clean. A small lapel pin rested near his collar. Subtle, but unmistakable to anyone who had worn the same insignia. "Major," I said. He gave the smallest hint of a smile. "Retired, sir. Aren't we all?" For a moment we simply regarded each other. 20 years collapsed into the space between us. Dust, heat, briefings under red light. Decisions made in seconds that echoed for decades. "I hope we're not intruding," he said quietly. "We?" He stepped slightly aside. Through the open sanctuary doors I could see them now. Men standing near the back wall, blending as best they could into the architecture. Dark suits, clean shoes, hair trimmed close, some with ribbons pinned discreetly inside their jackets, one with a cane carved from dark walnut, another with a prosthetic hand partially concealed beneath his cuff. 23. My breath settled deeper into my lungs. "You organized this," I said. Ruiz inclined his head. "We heard about the wedding. I didn't send invitations." "No, sir." A pause. "We didn't need one." I studied him carefully. "How did you know the date?" A flicker of hesitation. "Your daughter's engagement announcement was in the Regional Business Journal. Daniel Whitaker's father made sure of that." "Of course he did," Ruiz continued, voice low and respectful. "Some of the men still keep track of local affairs. When we saw your name mentioned briefly, we thought it appropriate to attend." "Appropriate," I repeated. "Yes, sir." I almost smiled at that. "You realize this is her day?" "We do." His jaw tightened slightly. "That's why we're in civilian attire." "And the formation at the back of the church?" I asked mildly. A hint of warmth entered his eyes. "Old habits." I let the silence rest between us. "I assume this isn't just social," I said. "No, sir." He straightened slightly. General Markham is here. That caught my attention. Active duty. Retired last spring, he insisted. I nodded once. Markham had been a captain when I first met him, sharp, impatient, brilliant under pressure. I had recommended him for promotion twice, once against significant opposition. He had surpassed every expectation. And what does the general intend to do? I asked. Ruiz chose his words carefully. He intends to pay his respects. In what manner? He believes recognition should be given where it is due. A pause, especially when it has been minimized, so they knew, not the details perhaps, but enough. I did not request intervention. I said evenly, "We know that, sir. Then why risk making a spectacle?" Ruiz's expression did not change, but something firm entered his voice. "With respect, Colonel. Sometimes silence allows the wrong narrative to harden." There it was again. Narrative. I glanced toward the front of the sanctuary. Daniel's father was speaking with the officiant now, gesturing toward the program, confident, certain. "I have no desire to embarrass my daughter," I said quietly. "And none of us would ever do that intentionally," Ruiz replied. "But we will not allow you to be reduced." Reduced. The word felt precise. I looked past him at the men who had once followed my orders into places maps barely acknowledged. I remembered the weight of responsibility. Not authority for its own sake, but the burden of bringing as many home as possible. 23 had made it back. Not all whole. Not all untouched, but alive. They had not come for spectacle. They had come for acknowledgement. "When?" I asked. Ruiz met my eyes. "At the moment of giving." "Giving what?" "The bride," he said simply. I considered the implications. The aisle. The program. The escort listed in print. "Does my daughter know you're here?" "No, sir." "Does Daniel's father?" "I believe he recognized General Markham when he entered," Ruiz replied. "He served briefly on a Veterans Advisory Council." "Of course he had." I exhaled slowly. "This must remain dignified," I said. "It will, sir." No raised voices. No accusations. "Yes, sir." I looked down at my hands resting on the cane, the skin thinner than it once was, the veins more visible. For years I had chosen quiet, chosen obscurity, chosen to let the past remain folded away, not out of shame, out of preference. But preference is different from erasure. "Very well," I said. Ruiz's shoulders squared, not in triumph, but in understanding. "The general will wait for your signal," he said. "I won't be signaling," I replied. "He'll know." Ruiz allowed himself the smallest smile. "Yes, sir." He usually does. From the front of the church, the music shifted. The processional was beginning. Ruiz stepped back into the aisle. "Whatever happens," he said softly, "we stand with you." I inclined my head. "And I with you." He returned to his place at the rear. The doors at the front of the sanctuary began to open, and for the first time that day, I did not feel like a man in row 14. I felt like a man being measured. The music rose, soft and deliberate. All heads turned toward the front doors. Rachel stood there, framed in white and light, her veil catching the glow from the stained glass windows behind her. For a moment I did not see the seating chart. I did not see Daniel's father in the front row. I saw a little girl in oversized rain boots, standing at the edge of a river, asking me if the current was strong. "It can be," I had told her. "But you don't fight it. You learn how it moves." Now she stepped forward alone. No Thomas Avery at her side. That, at least, had changed. There was a brief flicker of confusion near the front row. Daniel's mother leaned toward her husband. He frowned slightly, scanning the program. Rachel began her walk down the aisle unescorted. Each step was steady. Halfway down, the music faltered. It wasn't obvious at first, just a violinist missing a beat. Then the rear. Doors of the sanctuary opened fully. The sound of wood against stone echoed through the church. 23. Men entered, not in formation, not marching, simply walking with purpose. Conversations stopped mid-whisper. Heads turned in sequence, like a slow-moving wave. They did not rush. They did not bow their heads. They walked until they reached the center aisle, then stopped. General Markham stepped forward. He was taller than I remembered. Or perhaps age had simply compressed my memory. His hair was white now, cut close. His suit immaculate. On his lapel, a small arrangement of ribbons that would mean nothing to most of the room and everything to few. Daniel's father stood abruptly. He recognized him. I saw it in the way his posture shifted from irritation to calculation. The officiant looked uncertain. "Is there," he began, voice thin. General Markham raised a hand slightly, not to silence, to steady. "Apologies for the interruption," he said, voice resonant but controlled. "We will be brief." Rachel had stopped walking. She stood 3 pews from the altar, bouquet trembling just enough to notice. Her eyes found mine. For a second, confusion, then dawning comprehension, then something else, fear perhaps, or realization. Daniel looked between his father and the general. "What is this?" he whispered sharply. Markham continued, addressing the room with measured clarity. "We are here today to honor a wedding," he said. "But before this ceremony proceeds, there is a matter of acknowledgement." A murmur rippled through the guests. Daniel's father stepped into the aisle. "General Markham," he said with a practiced smile. "What an unexpected surprise." Markham inclined his head politely. "Mr. Whitaker, if this concerns the Veterans Council, it does not." Markham replied calmly. His gaze shifted. "To me, Colonel Samuel Carter," he said. The room seemed to contract around the name. I did not stand. "Not yet," Markham continued, voice even. "Many years ago, I had the privilege of serving under a commanding officer whose leadership saved lives that statistics will never fully capture." Silence deepened. He declined commendations. He redirected credit. He retired without ceremony. A pause. "But some debts are not erased by time." Rachel's hand moved slightly, tightening around her bouquet. Daniel's father glanced toward the printed program in his hand. As if searching for a script that did not exist, Markham took 1 step forward. "Colonel Carter," he said, "it would be our honor if you would escort your daughter the remainder of the way." The words did not boom. They settled, heavy, inevitable. Every eye in the church turned toward row 14. For a moment, I considered remaining seated, remaining small, allowing the ceremony to proceed as edited. Then I looked at Rachel. She was no longer pale. She was staring at me with something raw and unguarded. Not anger, not pride. Recognition. I rose slowly. The cane steadied me as I stepped into the aisle. No one spoke. As I walked forward, the men at the back parted quietly, forming a corridor, not rigid, not theatrical, simply present. I passed Daniel's father. He gave me a look I had seen before in different forms over the years. The recalculation of a man who has misjudged the room. "Colonel," he said quietly. Almost involuntarily, I inclined my head but did not pause. When I reached Rachel, she was trembling. "Dad," she whispered. It was not a strategic word, it was a daughter's. I offered my arm. For a heartbeat she hesitated, not out of rejection, but out of the weight of what had just shifted. Then she placed her hand on my sleeve. Her grip was tight. We turned toward the altar together. The music resumed, stronger this time. As we walked, I felt every pair of eyes on us, not in scrutiny, in understanding. Halfway to the front, Rachel leaned closer. "I didn't know," she breathed. "I know," I said, at the altar. Daniel stood straighter than before, not threatened, measured. The officiant cleared his throat. "Recovering. Who gives this woman?" Rachel's hand tightened on my arm. I could have said many things in that moment, could have recited rank, history, sacrifice. Instead, I answered simply, "Her mother and I do." A quiet ripple passed. Through the room, I placed Ellen's ring into Rachel's palm. Her fingers closed around it as if anchoring herself. Then I stepped back. The ceremony continued, but the narrative had already changed. I did not return to row. There was a pause, barely noticeable to most after I stepped back from the altar. The officiant adjusted his notes. Daniel reached for Rachel's hands. The ceremony resumed its intended rhythm, but something fundamental had shifted, not in volume, in posture. Daniel's father remained standing a moment longer than necessary before easing back into his seat. His expression had settled into something neutral, though his eyes were sharper now. Observing, reassessing, the guests were quiet in a different way, not confused anymore. Attentive. As vows were exchanged, I moved to the side aisle rather than the back. No usher stopped me. No coordinator redirected me. The geography of the room had quietly reorganized itself. When the officiant invited the congregation to be seated after the exchange of rings, General Markham stepped forward again, this time only one pace. He did not interrupt. He waited. The officiant glanced toward Daniel's father instinctively, then back to Markham. A silent negotiation passed between them. Then the officiant nodded once. "Before we conclude," he said carefully, "General Markham has requested a brief word." It was framed as courtesy. Markham approached the front without hurry. "Thank you," he began. "I will be brief." His voice carried, but it did not dominate. Weddings mark the joining of families. They also remind us of the foundations those families are built upon. He turned slightly toward Rachel and Daniel. "Your father," he said to Rachel, "is a man who led from the front when doing so carried real consequence." A faint murmur passed through the room. He commanded men who now lead divisions, companies and communities of their own. Many of us are here today because of decisions he made under pressure most will never fully understand. Markham's eyes swept the congregation. He never sought recognition. In fact, he avoided it. A subtle ripple of restrained amusement moved through the men at the back, but leadership does not disappear because it goes unadvertised. His gaze settled briefly on Daniel's father, not confrontational, simply factual. "Influence is not always measured in titles or boards," Markham continued. "Sometimes it is measured in who stands when your name is spoken." Behind him, as if choreographed but entirely unspoken, the men who had entered earlier rose to their feet, not sharply, not in salute. They simply stood. 23 men, different ages, different injuries, different paths since retirement all. Upright, the sound of fabric shifting in shoes against wood echoed softly in the sanctuary. No one else moved. Markham inclined his head slightly toward me. "Colonel Carter," he said, "on behalf of those who served under you, thank you." He stepped back, that was all. No list of operations. No recitation of medals. No dramatic language, just gratitude. The silence that followed was deeper than applause. Then gradually, respectfully, guests throughout the church began to stand as well, not because they understood every detail, but because they understood enough. Daniel looked at Rachel, then toward me. Something in his expression had changed. Not fear, not resentment. Respect. When the officiant finally pronounced them husband and wife, the kiss felt less like performance and more like promise. Applause filled the church. Warm, genuine. As the couple turned to walk back down the aisle, Rachel's eyes found mine again. This time, there was no calculation, only clarity. When they passed me, she squeezed my hand, hard. Daniel paused just long enough to extend his hand. "Colonel," he said quietly. There was no irony in it now. I shook his hand once. "Take care of her." I replied, "I will." The recessional music swelled, bright and triumphant. Rachel and Daniel moved toward the open doors at the back of the church, light spilling in around them. The men who had stood for me stepped aside once more, creating space without spectacle. As the guests began to follow, Daniel's father approached. Up close, he looked less imposing. "Colonel Carter," he said, voice measured. I was unaware. "That was intentional," I replied. He studied me for a moment. "You've had a distinguished career." I had a necessary one. A faint nod. "Well," he said carefully, "it appears our families are well matched after all." I held his gaze. "Families are rarely matched by resume," I said. "They're matched by character." He absorbed that without argument. Outside, laughter rose as the newlyweds were greeted with cheers. Inside the church, the air felt lighter, not because I had been elevated, but because I had not been erased. As I stepped toward the exit, Ruiz fell into quiet stride beside me. Clean and dignified, he murmured. As promised, I said. He gave a small nod. Outside, my daughter was waiting. Outside the church, the July sun was bright without being harsh. Guests gathered along the stone walkway, tossing dried lavender as Rachel and Daniel emerged through the doors. Laughter carried easily in the warm air. Cameras clicked in quick succession. Someone uncorked champagne too early. For a few minutes, the day belonged entirely to them, as it should. I stood near the edge of the courtyard, not hidden, but not central. Several of the men who had come to support me lingered at a respectful distance, speaking quietly among themselves. They did not hover. They did not claim attention. They had done what they came to do. Rachel eventually disentangled herself from a cluster of bridesmaids and turned, scanning the crowd. When her eyes found me, she didn't hesitate. She gathered the front of her dress slightly and walked toward me. Daniel a step behind her. Up close, I could see where she had cried earlier. The makeup artist had done excellent work, but a father notices these things. "Dad," she said, no titles, no qualifiers, just Dad. "You look happy," I replied. "I am." She paused. "And overwhelmed." "That's appropriate." She let out a breath that trembled at the edges. Daniel cleared his throat softly. "Mr. Colonel." He stopped and reset. "Samuel, may I?" He gestured slightly toward the side garden, a quieter space away from the guests. I nodded. We walked a few paces off the main path, beneath a maple tree whose leaves shifted gently overhead. For a moment, none of us spoke. It was Rachel who broke the silence. "I owe you an apology," she said. Her voice was steady but not rehearsed. "You don't owe me a performance." I replied, "That's not what this is." She swallowed. "I thought I was protecting the day, protecting us from complications. And in doing so," I asked gently, "I reduced you." The words came out quickly, as if she had been holding them back. "I made you smaller so everything else would look bigger." I did not rush to answer. Daniel shifted his weight beside her. "I should have said something," he admitted. "When my dad started talking about optics and introductions, I let it happen. I told myself it wasn't personal. It rarely feels personal to the person benefiting," I said. He accepted that without defensiveness. Rachel looked down at her hands. Ellen's ring caught the sunlight. "I was afraid," she said quietly. "Of what?" "That if people saw the full picture, your career, your rank, the respect you command, it would change the balance. Between whom?" She hesitated. "Between families. Between Daniel and me. Between expectations." I studied her face. "You thought my past would overshadow your future." Her eyes lifted slowly. "Yes, there. It was. Not shame of me, fear of balance." I nodded once. "When you were 9, I said, you insisted on carrying your own backpack the first day of school. It was too heavy. You nearly tipped backward." A faint, confused smile touched her lips. "I remember. I offered to carry it. You refused." "I wanted to prove I could handle it." "And you could," I said. "But you didn't have to prove it by pretending the weight wasn't there." Her eyes filled, this time without concealment. "I didn't know how to hold both," she whispered. "Your history and my new life. They felt like competing stories." "They are not competing," I said calmly. "They are consecutive." Daniel looked at her, something settling into place behind his expression. "My father measures worth in visibility," he said slowly. "Board seats. Public acknowledgements. I suppose I learned that without realizing it." "That is one way to measure," I replied. "And yours?" he asked. I considered the question. "Mine has always been simpler," I said. "Who stands when it matters? Behind us." Laughter rose again as someone called Rachel's name for photographs. She wiped at her eyes carefully. "I said you were a retired nobody," she said, voice barely audible. I heard myself say it and I knew it wasn't true. "But it was convenient, I know. You heard me, didn't you?" "Yes." The honesty of that seemed to hit her harder than anger would have. "I'm so sorry," she said. I reached out and adjusted a stray curl near her temple, the way I had when she was small. "Rachel," I said, "I chose quiet. I chose a small house. I chose not to introduce myself by rank at the grocery store." "I know, but small is not the same as insignificant." She nodded. Deer's slipping free now. I see that, she said. Daniel stepped closer to her. So do I, he added. There was no grand reconciliation, no dramatic embrace that drew applause from the courtyard. Just 3 people standing under a tree, recalibrating. I don't need your guests to understand my resume, I said. But I do need my daughter to understand my character. She met my eyes directly. I do, and I need your husband to know that leadership is not loud. Daniel held my gaze. I understand that now, he said. I believed him. Rachel drew a slow breath. Will you sit at the head table? She asked. I considered it. The old instinct to decline, to recede, rose automatically. Then I thought of row 14. I will sit where I belong, I said. Her answering smile was small, but genuine. That's the head table, she said. We returned to the courtyard together. As we approached, several guests turned, some curious, some newly aware. Daniel's father watched us with a thoughtful expression I hadn't seen before. He stepped forward slightly. Samuel, he said, dropping the formalities, we'd be honored if you joined us up front. The shift was subtle but real. I will, I replied. At the reception, introductions were made differently than they had been rehearsed. Not exaggerated, not embellished, simply accurate. When my name was spoken, a few of the men who had stood earlier inclined their heads from across the room. No spectacle, no salute, just acknowledgement. Later, during dinner, Rachel leaned toward me. I used to think strength was about controlling the room, she said quietly. And now, I think it might be about not needing to. I allowed myself a small smile. That's a good lesson to begin a marriage with. As the evening wore on and the music softened, I stepped outside alone for a moment. The sky was deep blue, nearly indigo. Crickets had begun their steady rhythm. Through the reception hall windows, I could see my daughter laughing fully, freely, her hand in Daniel's. I did not feel replaced. I did not feel minimized. I felt complete, not because a general had spoken, not because 23 men had stood, but because truth, once quiet, had been allowed to breathe. I have been called many things in my life, sir. Colonel Commander. Today, the word that mattered most was simpler. Dad. If there is a lesson in any of this, it is not about rank or reputation. It is this. A man does not become somebody when a room stands for him. He becomes somebody long before that, when he stands quietly for others, and if you are fortunate one day, they stand back.